weirdly have never seen the silent film By the Law until recently. There's no way
You're
I
going to
couldn't.
be working on that?
No. But it looks like there's no way that I couldn't have made The Lighthouse without seeing it.
Okay, let's see what this is all about.
1 hour later.
Oh, I get it. By the Law is a Soviet drama, thriller, like kind of psychological film released in 1926 and directed by one Lev Kuleshov. It takes place in a cabin over the winter, and a couple things happen during that time. Before we get into the thick of it, I really do want to emphasize that you should go watch this right now. It's free on YouTube. It's 1 hour and 20 minutes. It's an engaging, pretty easy watch. There are English subtitles. There are no barriers here. You want to experience this without spoilers, because I will be spoiling all of it. And then come back. And also, while you're there, can you like the comment I made on the linked version in the replies below? Thank you. As this film opens, we see several characters being introduced as members of a mining expedition, likely during the Yukon Gold Rush between 1896 and 1899. This drew in many, many people to the northwest of modern-day Canada and Alaska. In our party, we have the Irishman, Michael, the Swedish chairman, Hans Nelson, his English wife, Edith, and the shareholders, Dutchy and Harkey, who aren't really given a nationality. There's also this very cute dog. These characters can be organized by nationality, and the way the film works out, this becomes very important for analyzing it as a metaphor for class. Hans, being referred to as chairman, is pretty clearly a member of the upper class, or like financial ruling class or bourgeoisie, or however you prefer to call it. In addition, him being from the Netherlands during this period, had a really, really large amount of wealth relative to income, as well as being third highest GDP per capita compared to other Western powers at this time. Michael is, well, Irish, a group that was part of a very large immigration movement to the Americas due to pretty terrible material conditions within Ireland during the whole of the 19th century. The Irish potato famine is the big event people point to, but the general wealth of Ireland was heavily weighted in favor of the British or Protestant aristocracy. Michael is just one of many millions who immigrated to escape the poverty of his home country. Just as immigrants to any country exist, there tends to be quite a bit of discrimination against the Irish in America at this time, as a factor of them being both an impoverished minority as well as Catholic in this majority Protestant country. So we can generally consider him as like quote-unquote lower class or working class for the sake of this analysis. So where does Edith fit in? Well, she fits in pretty neatly with Hans as part of the ruling class. By being married to him, she's pretty obviously on his side. She could be representative of like the middle or working class that sides with the wealthy, but at a certain point, that's just adding flavor. Outside of that, like the country she's from, England, was the colonizer of Ireland and extracted a ton of wealth with it. And B was neck and neck with the US for highest GDP in this time period. She is wealthy by both relationship and nation. She also carries her Bible around with her and seems rather devout. That's just a quirky part of her personality. So the odd ones out here are Dutchy and Harkey. They aren't really given an explanation as to who they are, but being shareholders, they can generally be understood as being relatively middle class, or really just aligned with the wealthy Hans and Edith. I would generally consider them to be upper class just based on how the film turns out, but I think that they're just aligned with Hans and Edith, and that's how we should read this, maybe. Okay, so in the beginning of the movie, it's pretty clear that the team has not had the best success with finding gold, as many gold mining expeditions and the gold rushes have experienced. And as they're eating breakfast, Michael is instructed by Duckgy to go take apart their gold panning and mining infrastructure, which he does go to do. And as he leaves, the rest of the group starts to eat his food, which is mean, and I don't like that. At the gold mine, while taking everything down, Michael pans one last thing. Hey, he found some gold. Michael runs back and tells them, and they all break into celebration. The hierarchy of the group pretty quickly becomes apparent. Michael is at the lowest tier of the social ladder, performing like menial tasks for the rest, while the others generally hold him in contempt. While the rest of the group is out panning for gold, they, in his words, make him their washerwoman. At one point, while Michael is out hunting, the group breaks out a bottle of drink for lunch and doesn't save anything for him. And as he enters, like coated in ice and holding this hunting rifle, Dutchy raises a glass and mocks him. Michael then proceeds to shoot both him and Tarky to death, and in the ensuing struggle, ends up hogtied and held at gunpoint by Edith and Hans. So, Hans wants to execute him on the spot, but Edith insists that they wait for the law, by which she means wait for the winter snow to melt, so that like they could take him back to civilization and have like a real trial. As Hans builds a grave in the frozen ground for Dutchy and Harky, Michael, being watched by Edith, threatens to kill you all someday. It is here that the main crux of the film enters, and the film really becomes about class conflict and violence. The relationship between Hans, Edith, and Michael is basically the mechanism by which things happen in this movie, but also a window into larger systemic issues. Michael kills Dutchy and Harky and is resisting the hierarchy created by wealth as they remove the pretenses of inequality. After having him do menial labor and taking his food, they then taunt him about it, removing the pretenses that their relationship was equal. He then reacts, perhaps not accordingly, but with the power that he has. He's holding the gun. I would not make fun of a guy holding a gun who might, have some temper issues. The rest of the film is really about how those with wealth choose to act after such violence happens. And one note before I dig a little bit deeper into this, I'm not really injecting my ideology into this movie without reason. It was released like 7 years after the Russian Revolution, and Lev Kuleshov was not exactly a wealthy man during his lifetime. I'll say that much. There might be a bit of influence there. Just saying. So, as the three are at an impasse, now they're stuck in the ice and snow until spring arrives. Hans wants to immediately kill Michael, but Edith insists that they wait for the law, by which she means there must be an official court proceeding. However, it is winter in the Alaskan range, so any travel is effectively impossible. Like, really doing anything outside is impossible. So they need to wait to take Michael back to civilization. During this time, Edith and Hans take turns watching Michael, who's just tied up on the bed for a really long period of time. That seems boring as hell. We begin to see some instability in Edith, perhaps brought on by like cabin fever or her friends being shot or isolation. Her and Hans get into a bit of a fight after he throws water on Michael's face, but it's interrupted by the cabin flooding. The Yukon is melting. With the cabin flooded and nowhere to go, Edith and Hans still keep watch. In one little moment of kindness, Hans gives the shivering Michael a blanket. Days pass, and nothing happens, just this waiting. At one point, Michael asks Edith, "What do you intend to do with me?" Now, this is a revelation. It means that Edith and Hans are not, in fact, interested in letting a judge or a jury appointed by the law decide his fate. Rather, they wish to decide Michael's fate themselves. They want to enact a personal vengeance upon him. As for why they need to wait until spring, that'll become clear very soon. In the span of time before land becomes traversable once again, Michael's relationship with the two evolves a bit. At one point, when Hans is looking for his tobacco fix, he realizes that he is out of tobacco. So instead, he takes Michael's. What an asshole. In response, well, Michael does this. What happens is Hans is about to kill Michael for setting the cabin on fire, which is pretty reasonable, I'd say, relatively speaking. And Edith stops him and is like, we need to wait for the law. This will become relevant later. Yeah, sorry. This also reveals a little bit about what they're going on, but that's all in time. Sorry. Later on, it's Edith's birthday. Michael gives Edith a pocket watch that low-key looks like pretty nice. And in exchange, she tells Hans to shave Michael. As Hans is shaving him, he holds the razor at Michael's throat. And a very quiet moment of realization and fear is shared between the two. Then Hans finishes shaving him. Later that day, Hans finishes baking the most dire cake I have ever seen. And they let Michael sit at the table, presumably to enjoy some delicious cake. They light some candles. It's a happy birthday. Birthdays are always happy. Always. Edith asks him why he killed the two men. And here Michael gives his hopes and dreams. He returns to his mother's home as a wealthy man. His mom always thought he would end up on the gallows, and he did something with his life. He struck it as a gold prospector. He's escaped the cycle of poverty that has plagued so many like him for so long. But such things will not come. Two men are dead at his hand, and no payment to be found. When he finishes his story, tears soak everyone's faces. When all the ice has melted and the waters recede, the law arrives. They have hardly developed any empathy for him, even though he moved Edith and Hans to tears, as well as seemingly made a bit of a reciprocal relationship with Edith. They seem to just want to kill him while cosplaying as arbiters of justice. Despite any feelings of goodwill, class conflict is not something that sentimentality can replace. At the end of the day, Michael is someone who punched up against the hierarchy, and there is no forgiveness for him. He is tried under the image of Queen Victoria in a swift trial, and sentenced to hanging by the neck. As it turns out, he was, in fact, destined for the gallows. The reason for the wait for spring was so that Edith and Hans could hang him from a tree. There was no doubt about his guilt in their minds, and the game was solved from the start. It's emotion-driven vengeance wearing the skin of a legal system. While rewatching this film, I realized that I do have a genuine dislike of Edith and Hans, and it might just be my ideological tendencies or possibly even my Irish heritage acting up. But this film genuinely does such a good job of making you feel frustrated and annoyed at these two. Despite them technically doing the right thing, they're just kind of annoying. Michael is somehow the most sympathetic character here, despite killing two people. Maybe it's just because he's a handsome guy. Pretty privilege is a real thing. But now, spring is arrived. Brandishing her Bible, Edith leads Michael and Hans to the fated tree. By his own force, Michael gets on the makeshift gallows and sticks his head through the noose. Edith and Hans put all their weight on the box, and a storm rolls in later that night. A door creaks open. In walks Michael, noose around his neck. He collects some of his payment from the table. Before leaving, he takes the noose and throws it to the floor. Man, I love this movie. The way I've been structuring my reading of it, as you've seen, is how like class and violence intertwine to protect and incriminate each other. The main conceit of the film is like, will Michael be executed? That's a question created by economics, and when answered by economics, Edith and Michael being upper class, deciding if this like lower class guy who resisted the hierarchy should be punished or not. The third to last shot of this movie is a painting of Queen Victoria. I'm not to be a John Stuart Mill kind of guy, but I'm going to repeat myself a lot here. Michael shoots two men for ignoring the implied, at least surface level quality and respect of the social contract. The two men are wealthier than him, and those who actually are their equals immediately respond with a plan of violence. They were waiting for spring to happen so that they could go outside and then hang him. There was no doubt in their minds. They carry out like this show trial and then execute him. Only like the ghost of Michael walks in to collect a few coins and then leaves the two with like the massive wealth of the gold mine and like blood on their hands. Nothing has changed materially, but now they have like some bad memories. And all of that is over some laundry, a glass of wine, and a lack of respect. It would not have taken much to avoid this whole situation from happening. Will the ruling class ever really get impacted by this? No. It might really just be a mild inconvenience. But can we draw parallels from this instance to the real world? Of course. Of course. Nat Turner's rebellion and following execution, like the Ludlow massacre and the following exoneration of the Rockefeller family and the Mau Mau rebellion in Kenya, are all examples of resistance against elite that, despite a momentary sense of power, simply failed in the end. Now, this is not to say that resistance against elites is futile. Kenya did gain independence, and non-prison slavery in the United States was eventually abolished, but hot-tempered moments of rage will not bring great change. Luigi Mangione, for all his eyebrow hairs, did not in fact spark a revolution of the proletariat by killing a single CEO. Coordinated, large-scale movements are far more likely to do something than individual action. And yeah, this reading of By the Law is not exactly airtight. I think I was making some presumptions about Harkey and Dutchy's level of wealth. But it's the conclusion that I've come to. But outside of my filthy commie perspective and analysis of why this is actually a movie about class warfare, this is just a cool film. And there are so many little things that give it so much vibrancy. Like, there are so many shots of the actors just approaching the camera in this really creepy way. They aren't blinking or anything. They're just walking up, and like the camera isn't like adjusting its focus, so it like has this like really like ghost-like effect. And the shots of the environment can be like so hostile or like beautiful or whatever the movie needs. The dog, as I said earlier, is very cute. The way the actors pilot their faces is incredibly dynamic. It's like nearly surreal with how exaggerated but also nuanced it is. This film feels like unlike anything else. On that note, I do want to talk about what it does actually kind of feel like now that I think about it. The Lighthouse. The reason why I was prompted to see it By the Law was that interview at the beginning with Robert Eggers, the director of The Lighthouse, where he talks about By the Law inspiring The Lighthouse a lot. And yeah, on the basic plot structure, they are very similar. There are people isolated, very intimate shot composition, and a lot of tension. And while I love The Lighthouse as well, I think that I just like By the Law just a tad bit better. This is mostly because I like the socioeconomics of By the Law a lot more than the Freudian weirdness of The Lighthouse. To be clear, they're both very good. You should go watch The Lighthouse as well. That is a very, very good movie. Also, Robert Pattinson looks so much like Vladimir Fogel, the guy who plays Michael in that movie. It's like kind of uncanny, and it feels very purposeful. They're very similar. If you've seen The Lighthouse, this film is just so good. I can't stress enough that you should watch this if you haven't already. Go watch more movies and consume more media, regardless of where it's from. Sometimes you can find like real gems hidden in plain view, tucked under a pillow, or somewhere undefined that is yet to be explored. Maybe one of them will inspire you to create change, or reach out to someone, or just simply feel better about your own existence. Maybe one will even inspire the creation of a republic of the worker. Maybe. Hello to all who may be watching or listening. You did it. You made it to the end of the video. I just made it to the end of the script, and I must say, I'm excited to see where this will go. It's 10 pages long right now, and I don't really know how much of it is going to be on the cutting room floor. Hopefully not too much. Anyways, this was a real treat to make. Any thoughts, questions, etc. can be typed below in the word box. Subscribe, tell your children of my adventures. Also, just between you and me, I have my next 2 videos planned out. Okay, my roommate walked in while I was doing this. I'm gonna finish this. Okay, so one is favorite things in 2024, and it's going to be everything from movies to music to games to anything. It can be literally anything. The other is about an amazing album that I have heard precisely 0 people ever talk about. As always, thanks for watching.